Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced. The best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. All right. Hello, everybody out there. Whenever you are listening to this, it is another day of quarantine, wherever you might be in the world today. Isolation, quarantine somewhere. I am in Columbus, Ohio still, and it's gloomy outside. It's actually raining today, but I am making the most of all of these days and trying my best. I know that these are disorienting times for so many people around the world. Of course, it's disorienting for us as humans, families, businesses, and just certainly the world. And so I know I am trying every day to start my day with some gratitude for my life, for my health, for the people around me, and then also trying to be thoughtful about all the people out there that aren't healthy right now and trying to be supportive and send some love their way, and for all the people on the front line serving those that are in need. The purpose of these quarantine chats, as I've been just reaching out and connecting with people around the world, is very simply to just spread some positivity during this time, to spread some care, and to help us all think about maybe our mindset of how we're approaching not just these days of quarantine and isolation, but just how we think about our own leadership, how we move throughout the world, and how that impacts the people around us. So I've been inviting in people that I want to reconnect with and voices that I appreciate and people that I just wanted to see. I am excited to now invite in my friend Carri Twigg, who is someone that I've known for so many years. And every time I see her, she gives that giant smile, which you see on the screen now. And it brings such a smile to me. I've known her for so many years. A super smart, wonderfully talented person and friend, former employee at the Whitehouse under the Obama administration, now founder of Culture House Media, which I want to hear more about what kind of stuff you're into and things you're doing there, and just an amazing human. So hi, Carri.
Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited to see you and hear you. So you are in London right now. Tell us why you're in London and how is quarantine and isolation. I think you've had a little different experience than some of us, but unfortunately you've had an experience probably similar to a lot of people in the world too. So
yeah, so I'm in London. My boyfriend partner lives here, and for the last 2 years, we've been splitting our time back and forth. And we happened to be here for springtime, and we were here in March, and both of us got sick. We went to an event and got the Rona. And then, of course, had to quarantine and recover, and so weren't leaving and couldn't get on planes to get back to New York or to Ohio. And then just decided to stay put. Obviously, there's not planes in the way that they're kind of used to be, and the moving around is just a little stressful with borders closing and so on. And London's an amazing city, and it's having a beautiful spring. So we're very fortunate and lucky to be able to be in a city that's, gorgeous and where people are rallying as best they can.
Yeah, no, there are worse places to be quarantined in the world. London is a beautiful spot. But you're share with people from symptoms and like how bad was it? How you doing now? Any of that?
Yeah, we were really lucky. We both of us are otherwise healthy and have no other broader health issues. We're young. And we had it on the first wave, so we didn't know yet how lethal it was. Mm-hmm. And so my head wasn't full of kind of the horror stories I think we're all encountering now. And so I was able to go through the experience without too much worry. It wasn't the sickest I've ever been. It was not fun. It was gnarly for sure, but it was not the sickest I've ever been. We had really different symptoms. So I had an incredibly intense migraine for about 3 days, but it went away with Advil. And I had body aches. For 2 days, I felt like I'd been in a car accident or something.
Wow.
And my skin was so sensitive that I could feel my clothes on my skin,
Wow.
Which was weird. We both had fevers, and I completely lost my sense of smell and taste for about 2 weeks.
Wow.
So, which is such a bizarre experience, because you have these things that are so familiar and you cannot smell them. I couldn't smell gasoline. I couldn't smell rubbing alcohol. I couldn't, literally nothing.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the biggest differentiators that they've been talking about with this virus is just that loss of taste and smell, and how strange of an experience that is.
Yeah. And it kills your appetite. Like when you can't taste things, you can't smell things, you have no desire for them. And so I was eating because I had to, but I completely lost my appetite. Uzo, my partner, he didn't experience that, but he had chest pains that I didn't have, and he had fatigue that I didn't have, and his fever was much higher than mine. So even we clearly gave it to one another, but
Right.
We still had different symptoms. But for both of us, it wasn't harrowing, which we're very grateful for.
Well, that is certainly different, but I'm sure, I think that's interesting that so many different people around that have it, even in the same household, that are experiencing different symptoms is such a fascinating piece of all this. And one of the reasons why I think what you're hearing from people is it's hard for people to get their arms around what is it and how to identify it and all those things. So one of the things I'm always interested in wanting to talk to you about is, right now, what this whole global pandemic is doing across the political landscape is, for the current day, like what's happening is how is this impacting what's happening current day? But then how is this going to impact kind of what's to come? I'm interested. You do so much talk around this, and I love listening to you talk about the political landscape and, reaching people at times. And this is a unique time. Yeah. What are any thoughts that you have about that?
Well, I think in the same way that a lot of, we talk about, it's like the reason why you don't smoke isn't not so you not so you don't get cancer, but it's also so that when something like this happens, you're able and you're prepared, right? And I think about elections in sort of the same way. It's like the person you're electing is so important because the unimaginable could potentially happen, and that leadership is for the unimaginable, right? I think I would have bet all the money in my pockets in January that the exact scenario that we're in right now would not happen. Like, had you given me odds? Yeah. It would have been unimaginable, right? A peacetime mobilization that's larger than what happened in World War II on a global scale. It's unfathomable. And it's because these types of things can happen, why leadership matters. And leadership is determined by the outcomes of our elections. And so, people have to be thinking holistically about why civic participation is so important. You can meditate, you can pray, you can journal, you can eat organic, you can exercise, but you also have to vote. You also have to be thinking about your community as part of your individual health, as well as your family's health and your community's health. To me, that's on display on every country in the world, in every newspaper in the world. There's an analysis of who got it right, who got it wrong, who didn't take advice the way that they should have, who could have done something but didn't, who was making blunders, who was putting lives in jeopardy. And all of these people were elected. With the exception of a few countries on earth, all of these people were elected by the people who live in the places that they represent. So hopefully this is an example of why the stakes are so high. It's not just because of what you know about, it's because of the thing that you can't actually quite imagine yet. And I don't see a scenario in which coronavirus and its response isn't the kind of number one thing that's in people's heads as they go to the polls, alongside maybe a handful of other issues. But this is really what is going to determine so much of kind of the political mind, I think, for a generation, you know?
Yeah. And believe it or not, leadership matters. Evidently it's playing out right in front of all of our, faces, is that, again, and no matter what your political views are, or what end of the spectrum you look at this, or how you come to that for your own life, the reality is leadership matters no matter what. And one of the things, at least I think that I talk a lot about, is that in times of crisis, that's when leadership is revealed. Yeah. That when obstacles come, when ambiguity comes, when uncertainty comes, it's easy to lead and to say the things and do things when everything's going well. But when crisis arises, that reveals leadership. And so I think I agree with you that right now it's playing out in front of us, this showing us again that leadership and how we communicate with people and how we rally people and how we care for people, and all of that absolutely matters. I wrote up on my giant dry erase board in my home office here, I wrote up a quote from Sanjay Gupta actually the other day that he said, because it's related to the coronavirus, but I think about it in terms of just us as human beings and leadership and culture. And he was saying this very thing. He said, my health is dependent on your behavior, and your health is dependent on my behavior. And he was talking about this from a very, physical, global health perspective. But the reality is, I talk about it in terms of leadership and culture every single day, that's how culture is created, is by the way that my actions impact the culture of the space that we experience together. And so absolutely, on the political realm, and certainly in the months ahead, I mean, one voice, your voice, your story, your action is going to impact whatever happens from here. Does that resonate with you, or is that similar to the way that you think about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take us on a little walk because my internet is being funny. So I'm going to move closer. It is now 5 p.m. in London.
Yeah.
It is now 5 p.m. in London, so everyone's turning their Netflix on. But yeah, it absolutely resonates. I think one of the downsides of the relative safety and security and privilege that defines so many of our lives is the fact that we don't have to see that interdependence that exists all the time until we're in a situation like this.
That's right.
And we've allowed ourselves to buy into this false idea that we're not deeply interdependent and reliant upon one another and connected to one another. And we've divorced ourselves from that, like, really kind of foundational human truth. And we see the consequences of it. And, hopefully there's going to be lessons that come out of this, and learnings or even returns to knowledge, things that we knew to be true that we've allowed ourselves to forget as we move forward, no matter what the world ends up looking like after this and the ways that we're changed. And I hope that one of them is that very principle, is that we can't do this without one another. We can't do any of it without one another. And no one's an island. We're all so reliant on each other. We're so influenced by the choices that we make. And there's a version of society, there's a version of our country, there's a version of our communities that is much more generous and much more kind and much more oriented towards service to the whole than we presently are, and maybe it takes, I'm so reluctant to ever, there's such a tragedy unfolding. And so I don't want to make it sound like I'm looking for a silver lining. It's going to be tragic for people. And there isn't a silver lining for a lot of people to this. But this does illustrate that principle. This experience, I think, is illustrating that principle of the really deep ways that we're interwoven into one another's lives and accountable for and to one another.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. It's not, we have to be acknowledged that we are in a traumatic, challenging, and dramatic time. And for so many people, and especially if you're one of those people that has lost somebody, or you're in a hospital, or you're in a hospital caring for people that have it, certainly, our thoughts and prayers and hearts are with all of those people right now. And yet at the same time, to be able to step back and to say, so what can we learn from this? And what is this revealing about us? Which is what I think it's, for me, it is revealing all those things. And I think as I project out, which I think is just a natural human reality that we do, as we begin to project out and say, okay, so what beyond just today, what do we hope maybe carries with us, or from a positive standpoint, what do we hope can carry from this? And I know some of the things that I think about is, I think it is revealing that very thing that you just said, is it's revealing that we are more connected and need to be more connected than we've ever realized, or we allow ourselves to realize. I also think we're going to come out of this realizing that there are efficiencies and different ways that we can begin to operate and do things, such as what we're doing right now in really creative, and use technology for good things, right? And so there's ways that we can stay connected, but yet there is power in congregation. There's power in coming together and physically being in the same space and being together. And that's going to be a powerful thing that I think is being revealed to us right now. What are some of the things that you hope, or at least that you think carry beyond this?
I'm really, a couple things. I think on an interpersonal level, an individual level, I really hope that it's we're going to cherish one another, in a really profound way. I think, when we can go to a party again, or when we can hug people again, or whatever. And I hope that stays, I hope that we're able to really express that gratitude and that we have for the people in our lives in a way that is enduring. I think it's so easy. I do it all the time. I know, we all do. You take for granted the people that you love until they're gone. It's such a cliche, but I really hope that we're able to hold on to that feeling of real intense presence with one another when this happens. And then sort of on the global scale, for all the ways that I think that this could have been handled better, setting all of that aside, it does represent a large scale, massive global collaboration that we haven't seen before, and that was often talked about as impossible. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about things like solving climate change, we've been so dubious that countries can interact and can work really hard together. We're just like, oh, well, Scandinavia can do it, but no one else can, and I'm perhaps Pollyannish, but very optimistic that we're seeing that narrative switch, right? And that coming out of this, we're like, no, we can solve massive problems, and we can get everyone on the globe behind behaving in a particular way. When you see things, and I don't want to, again, diminish any harm that is being caused, but when you see a country like India, which is third the size landmass of the United States with triple the population,
right?
That's a dense country, and they're social distancing, and they are staying at home, and they've mobilized 1.5 billion people to do the same thing that doesn't require a war. And that we've never seen that. And so that's very exciting. What does that mean for single-use plastic? What could that potentially mean for these other things that we kind of started to be apathetic about because they feel impossible, but they're not. And so I'm hopeful that there will be sort of a new optimism and vigor of collaboration and environment of collaboration around some of those big policy things that seem super hard to solve.
Yeah, and I think I love that, and I think again, it's playing out in front of our eyes right now. But I think what also is being revealed to us is that this term leadership which at some point in our history, people thought about it in terms of leader meant person at top of pyramid who barks out orders and tells other people what to do that are beneath them, right? And yet that entire paradigm, of course, has been shifted and is playing out in front of us, that no longer does that style of leadership compel people, and I would challenge maybe ever has, but compel people and or bring people together. That in fact, what's needed in the world, whether you think of it as your own small business or your own family unit or community on that very personal level, or on that wide global scale that we're seeing, you have to be a collaborative and participatory leader of how do we get people to participate in the changes that we wish to see. And it's not just about one person barking out orders and telling people what to do. It's about the participatory style of leadership that creates a culture that is how I act and behave impacts you and you impact me. And we all share in the co-creation of this world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Period. I mean, we just solved it. I mean, yeah, done. I guess we did it. Tell me a little bit, just kind of life-wise, and projects or anything that you're excited about that's coming up, or things that you're working on or thinking about, or ways in which are kind of exciting your mind and heart these days.
Yeah. So a few years ago, when I left the White House, I kind of had no idea what I was going to do, because I'd wanted to work at the White House since I was a kid. And then it was just like, wow, I'm 30 and I'm on the other side of my childhood dream, and I have no hobbies because all I do is read newspapers and go to work. So what am I going to do? But I realized since then, I kind of figured out that I really care about storytelling, and I care about visual storytelling. And so a couple of years ago, after a lot of ups and downs and false starts and so on, it's not nearly as neat as it's going to sound when I say this, but a couple of years ago, I started a production company called Culture House with two other women as partners, and we make documentary series. So we have a show, we're making them right now. We don't have anything out yet, but we have a show that will be on Netflix. We have a show that will be on Disney Plus, and a show that will be on Apple TV. Or Apple Plus. So that's been a really incredible experience of learning a new craft, but marrying it to work that I had done for years, which is really, how do you have a cultural conversation about politics?
Yep.
And how do you address some of the things that are kind of stifling people that we care about? But in a way that's accessible and approachable and makes sense to people who maybe didn't go to college to study politics, or didn't intern on the Hill, or don't understand the connection between these broad topics in their individual life. Yeah. So, one of the shows for Disney Plus is like a guide to growing up. And it's just like, how do you grow up in a world that looks really different as it relates to gender, or looks really different as it relates to race? I'm biracial, mom's white, dad's black. When I was a kid, it wasn't an option to say, like, if I told people I was biracial, they'd be like, not exactly sure what that means.
Right. Right.
And now,
thankfully, we've come a long way. Yeah,
exactly. But like, I'm 34. So if a 13-year-old's going through it and I'm the last generation, but it didn't exist for me, like, they're living in an entirely different world, and they need cultural support to understand and make sense of it. And so that show is about, like, if you're coming of age in a totally different world, like, where can you look? And how can we help parents, and how can we help kids just like be a teenager and like have some social media literacy, have a understanding that identities are spectrums, and so, but without ever having to have a political conversation, but that is still addressing these issues that will become politicized for them very soon, whether they want them to be or not.
I love it.
Yeah, so it's fun. So I'm really excited about that, and just like digging into projects that are at their core about how we can understand one another better, and therefore really kind of repair some of that fiber of interconnectedness that I think is so central to everything and having the type of world that we want, and getting to have our families exist in a type of world that will treat them well and be thoughtful and engaged with their safety, whether that's physical safety or psychological safety or emotional safety. And, we have some work to do, I think, as a community in the biggest sense of that word, to do a better job. I think we're not giving a ton of offerings yet about actual paths to understanding how to do this. Like everything else, I think relationships have to be taught, and we don't do a great job of teaching people how to have healthy relationships that cross genders or racial lines or ethnic lines or borders. And that basic stuff you got to learn first.
No doubt. And there's power, as you know, in which I love what you're doing, because there's power in story. We've always known that, but there's power in story. And the connectivity of those stories, and there's power in language, and how do we use language? And, I say in leadership and culture creation and all that all the time, is that if we can't articulate it, if we can't describe what it is that we're talking about, then we can't be surprised when it doesn't exist. And so the language that we choose, the stories that we tell, and you're right, how do we support people on their journey of giving them stories and language and examples so that they can begin to have different images for what healthy whatever may look like.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, wonderful, wonderful stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been so fun, and it's so funny because I feel like this is such a cliche of maturing or aging.
Yeah.
That so many of the things that I work on and think about and talk about now are things you and I were talking about 20 years ago.
No doubt. No doubt. And to me, again, this fires me up because it was as relevant then as it is now. And it's even more so like that how I see that as a promising, or at least those are universal human truths. And so like, how do we live that, and that it's still important to us in our lives, no matter what age we might be?
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. How would anybody find out more about, if they're interested in whatever Carri Twigg is doing, which they should be, but like, where do you point people to?
So my Instagram, I am kind of anti-Twitter. So my Facebook, my Instagram are Carri Twigg, CarriTwigg. Pretty simple. And everything's there.
Awesome. So. Awesome. Keep smiling, because I swear every time I see you and you smile, it is a ray of sunshine in the world. So it is so great to see you. Anybody listening to this, then you're picking up on the fact that Carri is a wonderful human, super smart, super thoughtful about what she's doing in the world, and doing really, really cool stuff. So anybody listening out there, I hope this has added even a few minutes of just positivity and a perspective, and maybe a nudging or a nugget, a thought in some ways of your own mindset and how you're navigating these times. You're thinking about leadership and culture and the role that you play in helping all of us create and set the temperature for our lives and for the world the way that we want. I hope you'll continue to stay tuned. All the social media channels at Jason V. Barger. I'm lucky, like this has been one of the joys, is I get to do this kind of thing and just share people that I think are interesting and doing cool stuff that I want to share with the world. So I hope you'll continue to check out Jason V. Barger and future podcasts at The Thermostat with Jason Barger that are coming up soon. So Carri, be well, be safe. Big virtual hug to you. Great to see you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using. And share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to your organization, or you have a question or comment about this podcast, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we all are ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.